Coverkiller Nation back again. So far in 2012, we've touched base with many different genres of metal in a very short period of time. Flame of God, we talked about the kind of metalcore sound that we've heard since the early part of the 2000s, one that, in which we're exploring a little bit more of a thrashy side or a more brutal side, one that's a little bit more honest. With Alcé, we touched base on the more post-rock, avant-garde, shoegazing style of music that has really been deemed by many people as just beautiful, lavish, and awesome. And then recently we talked about KO Dot, which is full-out avant-garde, which is very unique in its own right. But now it's time for us to talk about power metal. We're talking about Primal Fear's new album, Unbreakable, which is set to be released on the 20th of this month. And a lot of you I know say, well, you haven't touched base on a lot of power metal. We really wanted a Blind Guardian discography review of Coverkiller Nation, and something I put on hold indefinitely in 2011 sometime. And that's something that's not changed. It's still indefinitely on hold. It's something that may still happen down the line, but as of right now, I have no plans for it. So please, just forego from asking me. Primal Fear's Unbreakable. This is coming from a band that has been around since 1997 and has grown to prominence almost instantaneously, especially on the German metal charts, and with a lot of their work with Nuclear Blast. Now this is done by, or this is going to be produced and released by a super label, so to speak, and is not Nuclear Blast, but is still an album that really retains a lot of the Primal Fear qualities that they've kind of been using ever since 1997 and have not really diverted or divulged from very, very deeply. This is a band that uses a traditional power metal standpoint, which is very easy to see and also something that you would expect, considering some of the members have been part of power metal royalty, such as Gamma Ray. And if you listen to Gamma Ray, they definitely have a sound to them that is, well, pretty cut and paste. Something that's not going to undergo a lot of differences. Now, this is a band that somebody like D-Music Reviews or the like would really enjoy, considering they are big fans of power metal, and were big fans of power metal before they maybe explored any other genres of music. It was something that maybe was their NX point into the metal realm. So power metal certainly has its place. It's certainly something that you undertake a journey in fantasy or science fiction or something along those lines. Of course, with Blind Guardian, we sometimes go into the great works of literature like J.R.R. Tolkien, and we're really taken on kind of a sonic journey through these novels and these epic works. Same is also true with Primal Fear, which touch bases a little bit more with science fiction. Now, as far as the album is concerned musically, this is a record that is going to be a very standard power metal release, and that's kind of where power metal and I disagree sometimes. I feel whenever I listen to power metal, there's not enough risk-taking. I feel that they are able to get a nice little idea together where it blends traditional heavy metal with thrash, and also is able to sometimes envelop a bit of a progressive side where they're able to kind of explore these deep and sometimes complex arrangements. However, in the traditional sense, power metal is not one that sees a lot of deviation. It's one that kind of remains within itself and kind of likes to stay within that little niche. Now, typically with a lot of bands, this is not a bad thing, mainly because what they're able to accomplish very well. And it is something that makes them very distinct amongst the herd that is out there of metal bands. However, with Primal Fear, they've been doing this now for 15 years, since 1997, and I think that there's just not enough risk-taking or leaps being taken on this album. It's still a very solid release. It's still a good affair that has catchy hooks, that has prime melodies, and has, triumphant choruses. However, I feel that even with all of that, even with all of those potential positives, the negatives is just that I feel as though this is something that I've heard before. It feels very recycled, very cut and paste, very stay the course. This is an album that is roughly 60 minutes in length. It's not really that large of an undertaking in order to listen to it from front to back, because it does keep you very well engaged. But it's also because this is music that's produced very well and is written very well. The problem, once again, is just simply the fact that it's power metal, and power metal does feel very recycled. It's almost like whenever you listen to a power metal release, that you can name at least 3 or 4 other bands that have written a song that sounds pretty close to that. And while that may be true with multiple genres of music out there, power metal is one where it seems exceptionally apparent, and that's one of the inherent problems. What really distinguishes a lot of power metal bands is in the subject matter, and this is one that maintains the same Primal Fear philosophy of going through science fiction and going through different ideas along those lines. While the lyrics can sometimes be deemed controversial due to whatever they were to decide to choose to kind of distinguish, it's still power metal. So unfortunately, this is an album that is going to suffer the stigma of many albums prior to it, and a lot of albums that will be released after it. And that's simply the fact that it sounds like a lot of albums that I've heard already, and that's something that's somewhat of a problem. I'd like to see Primal Fear get a little bit more adventurous with some of their arrangements. I don't want to see them try to outlive their capabilities or anything like that, because, let's face it, if you try to do that, oftentimes you end up with a very poor album. I also don't want to see them radically leap to the point where they're just sampling a whole entire new genre of metal to begin with, because we see what happens with bands such as Morbid Angel that attempt to do that, and it's very negative. I also don't want to see them try to latch on to any sort of modern trends like a Korn did with the dubstep album that they just released. So, I guess what I'm trying to say is that I would like to see Primal Fear really explore their capabilities a little bit more, perhaps experiment with a little bit more of the way of progressive arrangements or thrash arrangements instead of just staying with their safety net. I'd like to see them take those risks and be a little bit bold about it. I don't feel that this is an album that does nearly enough of that, and I think that because of that reason, I really can't be upset about it, so I'm not going in angry nerd rant mode, but instead I also cannot be very pleased with it. It's something that I feel like I've heard before, from this band and from others, and because of that I have to give it a weak 6.5 out of 10. Still an album that, if you're the fan of this type of genre, I would recommend it to you, because you will enjoy it. However, for a casual passerby, maybe somebody who hasn't listened to power metal before, this is a fitting example of what power metal kind of is. And if you want to get into power metal and you enjoy this and you think that power metal is something that you'll love, expect to hear a lot of the same. However, for those who know what power metal is all about, and for those of you who are hoping for power metal to take a little bit of an adventure, this is not the album that's going to do that. And because of that, that's why it garners the weaker score. And because of that, I once again cannot sit here and say that Primal Fear is an amazing band. They have talent, and they show it well. There's a great showcase to it. But whenever it just comes to the core musicianship, whenever it comes to the core songwriting, I've heard it all before.